I want to tell you a little bit about the Soil Association because it's important for us. It's this association is a charity, and the idea for us is to address both the way we eat, the way we farm, and how we care for our natural world. And the main goal is to achieve regeneration and find health and balance, natural food, healthy food, in balance with nature and a safe climate. And that means working in different aspects. So we work with farmers on the ground, but we also work with policymakers. We also work with government agencies working with healthy food. So there's lots of areas where we want to be involved, but it's really important for us to hear what you guys have to say, the people on the ground, the people farming. So if you ever want to get in touch with us, please feel free to. It's great to hear what you have to say and your ideas, because at the end of the day, sometimes it's really easy to have an idea and not make it work on the ground because you don't have that knowledge. So your knowledge is absolutely critical to what we do. For our presentation, it's really important if you want to participate in several questions that Spiridula is going to be presenting. Just go to Mentimeter, go to menti.com, and we're going to be using this code throughout the whole presentation. We'll be updating it, so you don't need to worry, but please don't close it so that you don't have to input the code again. We're going to be asking questions throughout the whole presentation, and at the very end, we'll share all the answers. So again, Mentimeter, go to www.menti.com and then use the code 8507366. I will put it in the chat so you don't have to memorize it. But that's how we're going to be working today. Now, just a wee Spiridula, you look amazing in that picture. Don't look like that. These are Spiridula and Caroline. These are experts from SRUC. I'm going to read so that you know exactly what they've been doing because it's quite impressive. Spiridula is qualified veterinarian with a PhD on interactions between nutrition and parasitism. And she's been working in SRUC and has more than 20 years of experience. So if you have any questions, Spiridula is the person to come. And she's been leading on the anthelmintics research for the past 2 years now. It's been a while. Caroline is a postdoctoral scientist at SRUC in Edinburgh, and she has been focusing her research on how selective pressures of modern farming are shaping tomorrow's parasite populations. So again, a wealth of information that you can get just asking questions to Caroline, because she also has experience in France and New Zealand. So pretty well traveled and knowing different realities across the world. And then these are our lovely farmers, and you can probably see them in the screen as well. We have Kati with Svelas, and she's a former academic, and now she's breeding Anglo-Nubian dairy goats in Aberdeenshire, so all the way up in Scotland on the east coast. We're going to be showing you pictures because they were worth it, but they're adorable animals. Then that really interesting pictures that you see in the middle, that's a Charlotte from Her Majesty. Charlotte is near Glenalmond, Perth. So all these names that sound very interesting and very exotic, they're lovely places. And her livestock is pasture raised and free from antibiotics, pesticides, artificial fertilizers. And this is really important for her because her ethos is to prevent disease rather than treat afterwards. So she basically has enhanced the animals' diets with medicinal and culinary herbs, seaweed, fruits, berries. I mean, if you follow her on any of her social media, you'll find out that you really want to be part of her animals and eat some of the things that she gives them. It's absolutely lovely. And then Catherine's is farming an Ashok, I always pronounce it wrong, a Populi farm near Inverness. And she's basically been working to make sure that the environment starts working as a whole again. It's really interesting. Again, we're going to provide all the social media so you can follow them. Also, fantastic pictures. So without further ado, I'm going to let Spiridula start. Here's some pictures of animals for you to enjoy on Sunday morning. But we're going to start with a more technical side of things. Spiridula is going to be talking about her research, and then Caroline's going to tell us about a survey that was Europe-wide antibiotic and anthelmintic research. And then we're going to go to a talk with Charlotte, Katty, and Catherine. And then you can ask any questions about their experience in treating animals with natural anthelmintics. So Spiridula, I'm going to shut up now and let you take over.
Thanks so much, Anna. Thanks to organizers, and thank you all for being here this morning, well, afternoon now in the UK. I will start sharing my screen, and I'm hopeful the technology will not fail me at any point. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Good. So as Anna introduced, I'm a research scientist with SRUC and working on alternatives to anthelmintics for more than 20 years. What I would like to share with you is the work we have been doing for the last couple of years in RELACS project. So today's presentation, I'll start with giving you just a couple of slides on the cost of parasitism. I'm pretty sure most of you are well aware of that. So I will not spend too much time on this. I'll introduce you to the RELACS project, which is the project we're all working on at the minute. Introduce you on heather and why we are using heather, or why we're investigating heather rather, for parasite control, and how that may work. I will also introduce you to a second alternative to anthelmintics that will work in the project, which is the use of nematophagus fungi, so fungi that can basically kill worms. And then there'll be plenty of time for any of your questions. So worms damage and have an impact on lamb growth. I will ask you to look at the pictures first, because I think these are quite indicative of the damage. So the top picture is from the abomasum, the stomach of ruminants, and this is a worm coming out of an abomasal gland. As a consequence, this gland is destroyed and the stomach function is disrupted. And if you see the picture at the bottom, this is the damage that is caused by an intestinal parasite. You see on the right how the villi in the gut should be looking healthy, and on the left how they are destroyed by the parasite. So the worm infections reduce performance, and as a consequence of the damage you see here, they reduce food intake, impair the food digestion. They cause a trauma in the gastrointestinal tract and results in protein leakage, and of course they also cause gut damage, which requires repair. So there is less nutrient that are available for growth when we've got parasites in the animal. And this is a graph that is already more than, almost 30-year-old, but it demonstrates quite clearly, I think, the impact on lamb growth. So if you see this graph, on the left-hand axis, we've got the lamb weight gain, and on the x-axis, we've got weeks after infection. The blue line at the top is the growth of the animals where there's no challenge. Excuse me. And the bottom line with the open circles, if you want, is the growth of animals when they're infected at about 5,000 larvae a day, which is kind of a standard amount of larvae intake for grazing animals. The red line shows that the growth of animals when they're drenched with an anthelmintic every 3 weeks improves. So there is an improvement between the bottom line, which is without anthelmintic, and the red line, which is with anthelmintic, but still maintaining the same larva intake throughout. So regular warming will improve lamb growth. However, drenched, challenged lambs will still lose out, because if you see the blue line and the red line, there is still a big difference between the growth of animals that have no challenge and those that have challenge but get drenched. However, reduced challenge to improve productivity may be the way forward, because if you look at the line that's the second from the top, the animals, their intake is about 1,000 larvae a day. So they still take larvae to boost their immune system, but not as many as the standard practice would allow them to take, which is about 5,000 larvae a day. So by reducing the challenge, we can improve productivity and may not need to drench the animals with warmers. So This is what I would like you to keep in mind for the rest of the presentation. So the RELACS project, which we already briefly discussed about, is a European Union Horizon 2020 project, and it looks at the replacement of contentious inputs in organic farming systems. It looks at what happens in plant production, with copper, mineral oil, and fertilizers being the contentious inputs, but also in livestock production with anthelmintics, antibiotics, and synthetic vitamins being the contentious inputs. There's a lot of European collaborators, including organic certification bodies and universities. And SRUC and the Soil Association focus on anthelmintics and antibiotics. And the main focus today will be on anthelmintics. So the approach we take in RELACS is a dual approach. We're looking at the impact of bioactive forages such as heather. This will target the parasitic stages of the worms. And we're looking also at biocontrol agents, which is the killer fungi, which target the free living stages of the worms. And I'll give a little bit more detail here. So in the animal, we've got the adult worms, which are producing the eggs, which are secreted with the feces. And in the environment, they develop to L1 larvae and L2 and L3. And these are being ingested by the animals again, and then the circle is complete. So there are two phases, if you want, in the life cycle. There is a parasitic phase, which occurs inside the animal, and there is a free living phase, which occurs outside the animal. So the aim is to reduce gastrointestinal nematodes, so worms in sheep with grazing heather. And the second aim is to reduce the amount of worms on pasture and thus reduce the number of parasites ingested by the animals with the fungi. So the first question comes now, and if you go into the Mentimeter that Anna explained before, so you should go to the website menti.com and use the code that is written there. And if you don't mind telling us which country do you come from, and I appreciate some of you have already put these comments on the chat box, but if you could do it here, we can capture it better. And if you're a farmer, if you have ever used bioactive forages for parasite control. And the second question it would be useful to have an answer to is how often do you have to treat your animals with warmers to control parasites?
So, Julia, just a second. If everybody goes to www.menti.com and they use the code, we've had 30 answers to the first question. So we'll wait a wee bit more and then move to the second one. If anybody's having any trouble, please let us know. We're at 38. This is quite exciting if you're looking at it. My apologies, but otherwise it's going to be going back and forth. It can be a bit nightmarish. I think we'll wait just a couple seconds more for the first question, and then you don't have to do anything. The moment I refresh the question, it will refresh for you automatically, so it should be fine. I think we'll move from the region and country you come from to the next question. And don't worry if for whatever reason you've not managed to answer one question, we'll leave it open after the event. You can revisit it and see what's happening. So now we're asking, if you're a farmer, have you ever used bioactive forages for parasite control? We're already getting answers. And yes, there's quite a few that have done it. It's constantly changing between yes and no. It started with a very strong yes, but now it seems that most of you have not used them before. We'll give it just a wee second more, Spiritual, and then we go to the other one.
Yeah.
So far, most of you have not used bioactive forages for parasitic control, but quite a fair few of you have, which is very heartwarming. And then there's a few that are not farmers. And then we'll move to the next question, which is how often do you have to treat your animals with warmers? Ranging from never to every month. So once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year. It seems like most of you are either never doing it or twice a year. That seems to be the most popular answer. just a very few 4 times a year, very few 3 times a year. Most of you are either doing it twice a year, once a year, or never. I'll keep this open. Spiridula, if you feel like continuing, just go ahead.
Sure, yeah, there'll be
And
more
again,
questions.
as I mentioned, we'll share all this at the very end so that you can see as complete a picture as possible.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. So Caroline will be speaking just after me on the survey. We did an EU-wide survey on the use and the need for the use of anthelmintics in organic livestock. So I will not say anything about that. I will start sharing the work we've done on heather. And why have we decided to look at heather? Well, it is abundant in Europe. There is anecdotal evidence that hill sheep graze on heather, the leaves. And in general, hill sheep are more resistant to parasites. Of course, there will be many reasons that could be responsible for that, but nutrition could be one of them. There is experimental evidence suggesting that goats that are grazing heather have lower worm burden compared to those that do not graze heather. And heather contains condensed tannins, which are secondary plant metabolites that have shown to have antiparasitic activity. So for other plants, it was clear that when there are plants that are rich in this particular compound, they can kill worms, basically. So these are the reasons we decided to focus on heather. So that's the third question for the Mentimeter. Would heather grazing be acceptable to you? Could it have a negative impact on the environment? So if you don't mind answering that, just to gauge. I mean, it's good to say we're looking at the antiparasitic activity of heather, but if there is an ethical concern about whether it's right or not to do it, then it would make sense to review our strategy.
So it seems to be quite even. It's at the moment, it's 30, almost 40 people that have answered, and it's 2020, 22, 23. So I think that there is definitely a concern.
It is interesting to hear that. Yes.
Answered, yeah, it's literally 26, 24 at the moment. So quite even.
That's really interesting. And maybe we'll have some time to discuss about that later on. So the work we have done so far, we have done some in vitro experiments, so experiments in the lab to evaluate whether heather can stop eggs hatching and whether heather can stop larvae moving. And obviously larva moving is very important to complete the life cycle of the parasite. And we collected heather samples from various European countries, Scotland, Switzerland, Norway, Germany, and Spain, 2 seasons, spring and winter. And we tested it against 2 different parasite species of sheep. One is an abomasal and the other one is an intestinal parasite. We also had the opportunity to test 2 different species of heather at different doses. And just briefly, what our results showed was that there is a lot of variation in the efficacy of heather from different countries. So the heather from the UK was the most efficacious, so had the highest activity at the lowest dose. And the ones from Norway is the other way around, so it was the least efficacious. Having said that, there was still a significant reduction in egg hatching and motility of worms. But the UK one was better. And the different parasite species were a different susceptibility, with Teladorsagia, the abomasal parasite species being affected more compared to the intestinal one. This table shows LD50, which is the dose that is required to have an effect to kill basically 50% of the larvae or 50% of the egg hatching to be inhibited. So this value is the lowest the value, the better, the more strong the compound is. And indeed, the UK one is shown to be the most efficacious, with the LD50 showing the lowest in spring and winter. You see there's a differential efficacy between spring and winter as well. So basically, what our data show is, depending on the country and the time of the year, there is variation in the efficacy of heather against parasites. So the second alternative we're looking at is the fungi. The long name of the fungi is Darlingtonia flagrans, and it's a nematophagus fungi.
Perfect.
So how does that work? This fungi kills free-living larval stages. It can reduce pasture contamination by about 70%. It is commercially available in some countries. For example, it's got license to trade in Australia, because obviously Australia has huge problems with anthelmintic resistance. And there is a company in Europe, which is what we're using for our studies, that is, we'll be looking for a license soon. And what we're testing in these experiments we're doing is, first of all, interactions with heather in order to optimize efficacy, because there is already a lot of information out there about how the fungi works on its own. And one of our aims is to see if heather supplementation and fungi together are increasing efficacy against parasites. And we're also going to be doing on-farm validations. So the fourth questions I have for you, and if you don't mind going to your Mentimeter again, is whether you have heard before about nematophagus fungi, and whether you would give it a go if you're a farmer, or if you're a consultant, whether you would feel comfortable to advise that to your people, your customers.
So people are already voting about whether they knew it or not. Most of them didn't, but there are still a fair few who did know it. I'll separate it into two questions. So we'll give it a wee second more here, and then we'll move to whether they'll be interested in a wee second. But most people have not heard of it, about 40 against 20. So a fair amount of people have not heard of it. And then whether you would give it a go, let's see what people say. Most people would, definitely. That's a very definite yes. There's only one person, two people that are not convinced, but about 40 would give it a go, at least. Getting to 50 now. So again, I'll keep it open. If you want to keep on voting, just go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Anna. And the last thing I wanted to say, and I'm just going to leave you with that, is that the next step, what we are going to be doing is farmer trials, because we know the fungi works, for example, and we know the heather works on experimental conditions, but the question is whether they work on farm. So we're planning to do those trials in the UK, Germany, Switzerland, and France, where farmers will be participating. And we've asked them to use one of the alternatives that I just mentioned, and manage part of their flock using this alternative and part of their flock using their traditional control measures. And we're going to be monitoring a variety of different traits, weight gains and finishing times, fecal egg counts, and the number of anthelmintic drenches. And then hopefully by the end of it, we can say whether these alternatives will work on farm as well as they do under experimental conditions. So that's where I'm going to leave you with that. I would like to thank all our collaborators for their amazing help throughout. And if you have any questions at the minute that I can help. I don't know, Anna, what did we agree at the end? We're answering questions now, or we're answering questions later?
I'll suggest we can answer a few questions now. If Catherine could help me sort of like choose a few, that would be great. And then we can continue with her. I would say probably one or two now, and then we move the rest of the Q&A to the very end.
Okay, I think some of this came up quite often, Spiridula. I think it was missed out in the video. So can you just give a quick idea of how the spores are administered, what the cost would be, and is there any impact on the environment?
Of course. Yes. So yeah, all this was going to be explained in the video. So the spores are being administered with some kind of creep feed, so the animal's eating it. It's a very small amount, so it's really easy for animal to ingest it. And nothing happens in the animal. So effectively, the animal is just the vehicle of the spores to bring the spores into the fecal pellet, because all the work happens in the fecal pellet. And what happens there is the spores will germinate and the fungi will develop, and there they will attack the larvae as soon as they hatch. And this is how they reduce pasture contamination, how fungi reduce pasture contamination. There is no impact of the fungi on any other nematode species like free-living nematodes or soil nematodes or anything like that. They're very specific for the parasitic nematodes, and there's no problems on the animal because, as I said, nothing happens in the animal. The animal is only the vehicle of bringing the spores to the feces.
A couple of questions on the heather. What kind of quantities are needed to be consumed, and what happens if people don't have access to heather?
So great questions. The quantity we're still trying to optimize. It will obviously it will depend on how much condensed tannins they contain, and as I mentioned, there's variation in the heather efficacy across Europe. So the expectation is that heather that's richer in the secondary metabolites that's killing parasites, less heather would need to be consumed. In other places where the heather is poorer in those compounds, more heather would need to be consumed. So there's not a clear-cut answer to this at the minute, but we are trying to optimize it, and we're trying to develop, to quantify, if you want, the relationship between those two, to be able to answer that question better. And what was the second part, Caroline, of the?
Yeah, I'll just squeeze in one more question. Is can stock become resistant to natural alternatives?
Sorry, again?
Can stock become resistant against natural alternatives, or the worms become resistant?
Yeah, well, what is the main thing that is pushing resistance is that for anthelmintics, for example, is that the efficacy is really, really high normally, like 100%, and then the pressure is big when the efficacy drops down to 98, 97, 96, So, and then the pressure for resistance is really high. Now, for the alternatives, the kind of efficacy we're looking, if we're lucky, is like 50, 60%, if we're lucky. So at this level of efficacy, of course, it's not unlikely, it's not impossible that resistance will develop, but the pressure is going to be much less, because when you have 50% of the parasite population surviving, there's less pressure for resistance than if you have 98% or 97%. So that's what it's a matter of. It's not impossible, but it's going to take much longer compared to anthelmintics.
Super. I think that we can leave the rest of the questions for the end, Caroline. What do you think?
Yeah, no problem.
And so it would be great if you could start your presentation now.
Okie dokie. Has that come up okay?
Yes, all you need to do is share it. Yeah.
All right.
There we go.
Okay, doke. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about some of the work we've been doing, looking into how often vet meds have been used in organic farming, trying to see if there's any room for improvement with this. So infectious diseases are an unfortunate reality of livestock farming, whether it's organic or conventional. Two of the main villains that we're really trying to combat are parasitic worms or bacterial infections, of which there are a range of. Now, it's a good news, bad news situation, because although we do have very effective drugs in anthelmintics and antibiotics, their synthetic structures are kind of pitting them as contentious inputs for the organic system. That being said, in the lack of viable alternatives, organic regulations do authorize their limited use with justification to prevent animal suffering and the spread of disease. So one of the main project aims that we had in this RELACS project was to try and establish benchmarks for how often these anthelmintics and antibiotics are being used in the EU organic system. So we did this by conducting an online survey EU-wide targeting organic inspectors. And obviously the inspectors have specialist insight into what's happening across a variety of different farms. All right. So we kept the survey short and sweet, wanted to know two main questions. What proportion of farmers are including anthelmintics and antibiotics, either in their health plans or individual requests? These are the two main methods where organic farmers could use to submit justification for the use of vet meds. All right, so health plans are a tool that's used as part of like the wider disease management plan for the course of a year. And individual requests are just kind of submitting as and when the need arises. So these surveys were translated into various languages and disseminated across the EU, thanks to a lot of our RELACS partners, including IFOAM EU, Soil Association, Ecovalia, Naturland, ETAB, and FEVEC. So response rate, we got 139 responses from 16 EU countries. Collectively, these inspectors were responsible for 17,719 organic livestock farms. Should say this is mixed species. So I'm going to start by showing you the results for what we got for the anthelmintics. And again, I just want to remind you, the question that we asked them is the proportion of farmers in each country that required anthelmintics, requesting them either through their health plans or through individual requests. All right, so we're not necessarily expecting anything to add up to 100% here. What this is showing us, what probably jumps out at you, is that the proportion of farmers that require anthelmintics varies considerably across these countries. Yeah. Also, the way in which they're submitting justification or requesting them, either through health plans or individual requests, that's quite different as well. I really want to emphasize here that there's not necessarily good countries and bad countries. This data does not reflect the quantity or the frequency with which anthelmintics are being used. It is telling us the proportion of farmers that require them is very different across these countries. Right, I'm going to show you the same thing except for antibiotics. And again, this is the proportion of farmers in 16 EU countries that required antibiotics, either through health plans or individual requests. Now, the kind of main overall message is the same here. Very big country-specific differences. Yeah, so the proportion of farmers requiring the assistance of antibiotics is very different, as is whether they're requesting them through their health plans or through the individual requests. So we looked at this data a little bit closer to see if we could pick out any patterns, and there was a couple that did pop out at us. So we noticed that those countries that had kind of ranked on the lower side of using vet meds in their health plans, they also had low requests in their individual requests. All right, so that's telling us that they're not compensating through one or the other high individual requests, but low health plans, if that makes sense. And that was true for both anthelmintics and antibiotics. So we saw that countries that also ranked as having low requests for anthelmintics had low requests for antibiotics. So low countries were low countries. Interesting. And now across these 16 EU countries, the organic system structure and size is quite different. For example, the number of heads of stock in each of these countries, organic stock, the number of organic control bodies. So we explored these variables to see if we could find any patterns with whether a country was ranking as low, medium, or high in their requests for vet meds. But in short, we didn't really see anything obvious there. All right, so just to wrap up on this side of the data, this is the first benchmark we have on patterns of anthelmintic and antibiotic use in EU organic farming. Now, there were big country-specific differences, and we don't know why. We don't know if the different countries have different threats of infection, or if the different countries have more or less effective disease control programs, or perhaps treatment thresholds. We don't know. It needs more investigation because it's interesting. What this data does tell us is that the countries have different needs at different times for these veterinary medicines. Okay, and this really goes to support the current organic regulations, which do allow for some flexibility in the use of veterinary meds. All right, the next thing we wanted to do was try and get an estimate of the total inputs of anthelmintics and antibiotics going into the organic system in the EU. Right, so one of the first calculations we tried to estimate was the number of treatments each stock was getting per year. Now, for both anthelmintics and antibiotics, our estimates suggest that they're receiving less than 1 per animal per year. Okay, that's telling us that not all animals are getting treated. Okay. Next thing we did was multiply these numbers by the total organic stock in the EU, which is about 53 million. And that gave us an indication for the total treatments entering the EU organic system. Starts to paint a little bit of a different picture. It's looking like 45.5 million anthelmintics and 37 million antibiotics entering the EU organic system every year. Now, we don't have any data to compare this against. So I'll leave it to you to judge whether you think this is acceptable at the moment. Right, the next thing we wanted to do was get a little bit more detail on how anthelmintics and antibiotics were being used. So we did a kind of case study on the UK, And we did a survey of UK organic livestock farmers. If any of you in the audience did reply to this, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Okay, so we got 343 farmer responses. Collectively, they had 162,550 organic livestock. Most of these were sheep and cattle, okay? Now, the first bit of good news is it really seems the UK inspectors know their farmers. If you remember back to the inspectors survey we did, we asked them what proportion were using anthelmintics and antibiotics, right? So 61% of UK farmers reported to using anthelmintics. The UK inspectors thought about 69% were doing this. 43% of UK farmers were using antibiotics. UK inspectors thought about 40% were. So yay to our inspectors. All right, here's some specific results for the use of anthelmintics. 64% of the UK farmers reported to treating with anthelmintics 1 to 2 times per year. Okay. 65% reported when they were using anthelmintics to treat 50 to 100% of the stock. This may raise a small flag. We know in helminth infections, for example, in gastrointestinal nematode infections, there's highly aggregated distribution patterns, all right? We've got this 80-20 rule where approximately 80% of the worms will be found in about 20% of the individuals. And those individuals count if it's sheep, if it's cattle, if it's human beings. This is a very consistent pattern that we see. So if 80% of worms are in 20% of the individuals and the farmers are treating 50 to 100% of the stock, it may be excessive. And this may be something that we could look towards improving. All right. 18% of our UK farmers reported anthelmintic resistance on farm. We don't know what proportion of those had tested for it, but 18% reported it, 40% of which specified against benzimidazoles. Now this is interesting. 82% of our farmers reported to using fecal egg counts as one of their preferred methods to monitor gastrointestinal nematode infections on farms. This is important because fecal egg counts are the only parasitological measure that we have to monitor infection intensities. Yes, there are other indicators we can use, things like production loss, but these can also be multifactorial. So for the moment, this is the best thing we have. Right, also really encouraging is almost all of our farmers seem to be really open to alternatives. We'll look at that a bit closer. Down the left-hand side, you can see there's several different alternatives that can be used to reduce requirements for anthelmintics. All right, so in the blue, that shows the proportion of UK farmers which are already using these. In orange, it's the proportion that would try. In gray, those that would never try. And then yellow, well, they just don't know. All right, so if we focus on the blue, straight away you can see pasture management is used by a lot of our farmers, like 90%. And this is good, because this is one of the key tools we have to break transmission of helminth infections, or worm infections. The other thing that's used quite a lot is drenching individuals. This is also known as targeted selective treatment, or TST. And this really takes advantage of that 80-20 rule I was just telling you about, where they're really targeting the drugs to the individuals that need it the most. Vet parasitologists have really been trying to encourage this, because not only is this very effective at reducing infection intensity on farm, it reduces the quantity of anthelmintics used, and in turn, that reduces the spread of anthelmintic resistance, which is a scary prospect, yeah? All right, we'll focus in on bioactive forages and nematophagus fungi that Spiridula was talking about. About 40% of the UK farmers reported to using bioactive forages. Only about 1% of the nematophagus fungi, but that's understandable because this is not at all widely available at the moment. The other color I'd really like you to focus in on is the gray, all right? So that's telling you the proportion of farmers that would never try. This is very small. Granted, some of them don't know. Yeah, some of them may need a bit more convincing, fair enough. But really what's important here is our farmers are open. You know, they're keen to finding a solution for this as well. Right, now I'm going to focus in on the specific results for antibiotics. 70% of UK farmers reported to treating with antibiotics 1 to 10 times per year. When treating, 85% of the farmers were treating 10% or less of the stock. This is important. This reflects some differences in the use of anthelmintics and antibiotics in organic farming. Antibiotics must be targeted to the individuals, all right? And that's really what this data is reflecting. 2% of the farmers reported antibiotic resistance. Again, we don't know how many had tested for it. I find this quite interesting. We asked the farmers what were the 5 most common infections what were the most common infections that they required antibiotics for. And these were the 5 most common ones that were mentioned: foot conditions, mastitis, respiratory problems, parturition problems, and eye infections. It's quite a range of different problems, yeah? Now, farmers were open to alternatives. It's just the situation here is slightly different. Compared to the anthelmintics, there's a lot fewer alternatives. And then within each of these categories, organic acids, pre-probiotics, and phytochemicals, the number of those that are actually registered for use in organics is very few. And to boot, each of these is very much geared towards supporting gastrointestinal health of monogastrics. So they may not be suitable for all the needs for what our farmers have right now, all the challenges that they have. For example, I don't know how effective probiotics will be in treating an eye infection, you know, but the important thing again here is that very few of them would never try. So the farmers are open to finding or trying solutions. So just to recap on this, a lot of the UK farmers are making good use of the alternatives and using them well. But we're greedy. We want more of them, to use more of them, to find what fits best on their farm and use them. For the antibiotics, it really seems that the use is minimal and already targeted to the individual cases that are popping up. You know, and if we want to reduce these inputs any further, then we need to develop better alternatives to match the range of infections that are out there. So I'd really like to ask you guys this question. If you could go onto your Mentimeters and answer, what can be done to facilitate the uptake of alternative control measures on farm? Would you need more information? Do you think practical demonstrations would be helpful? Do you need more evidence? Whatever it is, we would really like to hear from you. We'll take it all into account. If you want to talk about one alternative specifically or globally, be very helpful. Just a reminder, the code is 8507366. Thank you. All right, to wrap all this up, just to say that this is the first data or benchmarks that we have on the inputs of anthelmintics and antibiotics. Big country-specific differences showing us that they have different use or need for these veterinary medicines. And yes, there is room for improvement. We all have homework here. Scientists, we need to optimize the alternatives. I promise you we're working on that. Farmers, we need to facilitate the uptake of the alternatives. And then, you know, it just comes down to maintaining these open channels of communication between science and farmers, making sure we're working on the correct problems and making sure any solutions are getting out there and used. All right. So just to say a big thanks to all of our RELACS collaborators who were here. Have been very helpful in all of this work. So I shall stop sharing the screen. There's questions.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Caroline. There's a fair few questions around fecal egg counting as a method to understand what your pressure is. So could you just walk us a little bit around it? There's people asking what is the preferred, from what is the preferred microscope to how often do you have to do it? And what's involved in it?
Okay, so fecal egg counts tell us how many eggs are in a gram of feces. And this is a proxy for the infection intensity. It's as close as we can get, unless we can get into that sheep and see how many worms are in there, which, you know, isn't great, isn't the easiest solution. Fecal egg counts are the best alternative. So the process to do them isn't that difficult. It just requires that initial investment of buying a microscope to do that. But once you've done that, I think it would give the farmer quite a lot of power to follow what's happening in their farm at what time. There's increasing amounts of remote kind of ways of doing this. I know FECPAC has made this a lot easier. I think there's ways of doing this, like taking pictures on your phone of things and they can count the eggs. Problem is it depends if there's a lot of different species of gastrointestinal nematodes, and it can get a bit more complicated to identify specific eggs. In terms of frequency of doing this, I think it would probably follow, Spiridula, please let me know if you think otherwise, but I think it follows those important timings where you would normally look towards dosing. So during the periparturient rise, for example, if you think that there's some production losses or your stock aren't looking well, maybe check in and see what the gastrointestinal nematode infection is looking like.
Yeah, that's right? And we have and what is it, practice abstract recently published on the use and the importance of fecal egg counts through RELACS. And maybe we can include the link. Or Anna, is that easy to do? I'm not sure if it's easy to do on the spot. Otherwise, we can maybe put it on the chat later. I'm not sure.
I'd say let's put it in the chat later, and before this finishes, we'll make sure to, for everyone, because I know that it can be held to go through the whole chat to try to find links. We'll put all the links to different things at the very end so that when you download the chat, you can just get it all in one go, including
That's great.
handles.
Super.
So there's a fair few questions still to come, but I would suggest we first go to our farmers, and then towards the end, we can leave us some time for Q&A, because I think it would be just nice to hear from them. So our farmers today, as I mentioned, are Charlotte from Her Majesty. Charlotte, can you wave? That's Charlotte right there. Then we also have Catherine Sharp from a Popperly farm. I made it. I managed to pronounce it properly. Up in the Highlands. Charlotte is in Perthshire. And then we have Catty in Aberdeenshire. Catty, can you wave? There you are. You're in the second one. And just for you to have an idea, it's really going to be short, but I wanted to show you who the other protagonists of this are. So I just wanted to show you a little bit of the animals that they have. Here we have Charlotte's farm with the pig, the turkey, and the little lamb. Then we had, if this decides to work, doesn't seem to be wanting to. There we go. Those are the goats. That's Catty. There's a few questions around goats, so we'll be talking about them. Those are Catty's goats in Aberdeenshire. And then if you want to see really cute lambs and sheep in very dramatic landscapes, that is all down to Catherine in Inverness-shire. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the benefits. So I really like the relationship that I can build with my stock, with, you know, not having to drench them, moving them onto new ground, and especially when there's lots of new interesting plants that they can pick their way through. I just love watching them sort of hunt around, and then when they find something that they really like or something that they need, they like really get stuck in, and I love that element of it. And I think it also relates really well to my goals for the farm, so like increasing biodiversity, making little patchwork habitats around the farm, and, you know, really like celebrating what's here and trying not to force things on it that aren't really appropriate for this landscape. And yeah, just creating a healthy environment for us all means that we'll all hopefully be healthier. I think also once there is like, I think once you've got the hedges and the pasture variety, like it's quite easy as well. Like, you know, you're basically just asking the sheep to just eat what they need, and if you give it to them, they will do it. And yeah, I suppose the like reduced cost of chemicals and the benefits for the soil from not having to use any as well. I'd say one of the main challenges I've found is speaking to the right vet. I was really angry with my vets last year because I just found them really unsupportive and really just kept on encouraging me to worm things, even though my egg counts were coming back okay. But this year I did a health plan with a new vet, and I really like her, and she was very understanding of where I'm trying to go. So I think that's been one of my main challenges. Like last year, I really sort of stopped communicating with my vet because I just didn't think they knew we just didn't understand each other. Whereas this year I feel much better about having their support in what I'm trying to do. I suppose the other challenge for me is I've only been here for 2 years. I've got sort of like historically improved pasture, so it's not very diverse. So just take the time that it takes to build up to the diversity that I want to have here, and for all the trees to grow and things like that. So yeah, that sort of time. And I suppose the other thing related to time is incorporating the sorry, that's my geese, incorporating the rough grazing into the grazing plan is yeah, it's about knowing how, like, what the best time to do it is, how long they need to be there, and making sure that they don't have a detrimental impact on their habitat, which I've seen a few things going on in the chat about that. So yeah, it's just trying to make sure that they can get what they need, and the landscape isn't isn't the worst for that. So yeah, and I think that will just come with experience and watching. But yeah, I think that's all from me.
Sounds great. And the geese. Kathy.
Yeah, very similar to Catherine's. Also, for me, I have to admit, I do spend a lot of time reading journal articles, researching a lot of this stuff. And one of my concerns is there's research going on in terms of how these things work in terms of controlling intestinal parasites, but not about other knock-on effects. So for me, crucially, it's about the milk. So I want to know what it's doing to my milk. Now, I do milk record my goats, so every month I know what my butterfats, my proteins are, what my yields are, but I don't know what other compounds it's changing in my milk if I'm feeding these various herbal supplements and other ways of helping with health. And the research just isn't out there. So for me, that's the big problem. And one of the things I will be doing in the field trials this year is I will be comparing all of my milk data with previous years to see what effects we're having, at least in terms of those things that are being tested. But I would like to see more information available on the other possible effects, really.
Sounds great. How about you, Charlotte?
I didn't start feeding my animals herbal alternatives because I was a farmer. It was really the other way around. I just wanted to feed my family on food that didn't contain chemicals. So mine's a nutritional way of dealing with things. I want meat that's as nutritious as it can possibly be, which means feeding it stuff that's as nutritious as it can possibly be in the first place. You get out what you put in, basically. So the stuff that I use to control all the diseases and the parasites and things like that, I'm noticing on the chat, there's questions about toxicity and things like that. You would do it the same with a withdrawal period as you would anything else. So if I ever use wormwood, then there's at least 2 months before you would actually let it go to slaughter before you put it into the food chain or something like that. You'd use the same principles as you use for any pharmaceutical dose. But the benefit is that if you've got something that's really toxic and it's too toxic for a human being to eat, your animal is already dead. If it's too toxic for the animal, it's too toxic for you. So you don't get to the stage where it's poisonous for a human being to eat because you don't have that animal. But I think the benefits of knowing that you're feeding people with stuff that doesn't have any future problems for antibiotic resistance. You're not degrading the soil and you're regenerating the soil in many circumstances. It all just makes common sense. It's all just where most of us probably who are at this conference are trying to get to somewhere along the line, and just being but small scale and not intensive is it's possible to do these things. So I think that's where I'm coming from, and that's the benefit for me, just a good, wholesome, nutritious food that nourishes us.
Sounds great. We're going to open the floor to questions. So I think that Caroline will take over. Thank you so much, Kathy and Charlotte and Catherine. I know that people are desperately taking notes. Don't do that. You can download the chat. There's 3 dots. You can just download the chat. And the other thing that I commit myself to doing is we've created a Padlet. I'm going to upload all this comments so that you can have all the different tips and comments and resources that people have done so that you can have it after the facts as well. And Spiritula can actually take a wee look afterwards and make sure that I'm not putting something there that is going to be really problematic for your animals. But now I'm opening just the floor, Caroline, if you want to start with any questions. And then if you want to just raise your hand, I see that Mark Gale has his hand raised. I'm not sure if he has a question there.
I have a comment. My first thing was when I thought about feed leg counts, having been to sheep meetings historically, there were grants available.
Sorry, Mark.
You're really bumpy, Mark. We can't really hear you.
Can't hear you.
No, we can't really hear you, Mark.
Could be great. However, just reflect.
Mark, we couldn't hear you. And now
Is it better now?
is that working? No. I'll tell you what, we can start with Caroline and we'll wait for a wee bit.
Maybe Mark can put it in the box.
Again,
Yeah. Mark, could you put your question in the, or your comment in the box? Because it's,
hello, not you getting me now?
I think there's a big delay.
yeah, I think that's just that. So yeah, no, Mark, we'll come back to you, but Caroline, if you could start now and then we'll go back to Mark because I know that he's there. I won't forget about him.
So there was a couple of questions / comments asking whether we think these alternatives are really have direct anthelmintic activity, or if perhaps they're replacing some essential minerals that the animals may be missing and boosting their immune systems kind of indirectly. What do you think are on that?
Yeah, so it could be both, to be perfectly honest.
I think it's both.
Sorry?
I think it's both. Yeah,
it could be both. Yeah, it depends. I think, yeah. When we're doing our studies, depending on the type of experiment we're setting up, we are able to test whether it's one or the other. And in some cases, we have been able to identify the boost of immune response as well. For example, when we did a few years ago, we were doing studies with chicory, and we found that chicory grazing actually improves the number of certain cells that are responsible for immune response. And I think the same from other people. Sainfoin has similar impact, but there's no doubt as well that condensed animals kill directly, because we've seen that as well. So yeah, it's a bit of both. To capture a nutritional impact, you have to have animals that are not getting enough nutrients, if you know what I mean. If animals getting enough nutrients, then you will not see an impact of extra nutrients. It's so yeah. To cut the long story short, it's very likely that it's both mechanisms are responsible.
There were also some questions on the legality of including various other alternatives. Have any of you as farmers come up against this? Catherine, Katie, Charlotte, or Spiritual, do you know anything about the organic regulations and what can and cannot be permitted?
Yeah, I don't know if the three ladies want to have a go, and I can tell my opinion.
I mean, the stuff that I'm certainly grazing is stuff that would be naturally available to them in a wild pasture. You're not giving them anything in excess of what they would normally naturally graze if there were no enclosures. So, you know, as it used to be, they roamed for great distances and they would pick up the plants that they needed as they went, for whatever ailments they had. We've made enclosures and we've stopped that process. And so, you know, I try and work it so that I'm replacing the accessibility to a lot of those plants that would not naturally and normally have been there. So you're not adding massive doses of things that aren't naturally in their natural spectrum of what they would eat. You're just doing it at a very low level, but on a daily continuous basis.
Great. Some of the other questions popping up is, have you found a good method to control on farm when you're trying something new? Do you try it on all your animals? Do you try and keep a portion aside? Do you kind of compare it against a non-new treatment? What is the best ways you're using these, trying them? Catherine, Charlotte.
I haven't for the anthelmintics. I have been doing trials of other herbal extracts in terms of effects on milk. What I do is I'll feed a proportion of the milkers, whichever herb I'm investigating, and then when the milk samples go off, I've got a kind of control of those who haven't had it and those who have, and then I can also track against trends from previous years, because I record yields every day, to see whether there is a definite effect in any particular herbal extracts that I'm feeding them. So I did one with using echinacea on somatic cell counts, because there's been a couple of research papers showing that feeding echinacea for a couple of weeks can increase lactoferrin levels and reduce somatic cell counts to help minimize the chance of mastitis. So half of my milkers got fed it, half didn't, and I was comparing somatic cell counts from before and after and for subsequent months. So I try where possible to just do it to part of the herd.
Okay, thanks. Some people are asking a lot about fluke and lungworm as well, if you guys have found any controls, anything that can be helpful for those alternatives.
It's so tricky. Fluke is just a complete bane for all of us living in Scotland, for sure. I found one plant that works, but it grows in South America, so the chances of it growing in Highland Perthshire really probably quite slim. Again, it's all anecdotal stuff that's supposed to help. A salt lick of Himalayan salt I use, so that's possibly going to help. There was something that Catherine had. She had a pack of seeds the other day that was quite interesting. Oh, look, there you go. Let her carry on.
There we go. Catherine has it.
Oh. Upside down. Yeah, for fluke, there's definitely fluke here. I haven't had a huge problem with it. I think I got my first liver rejected from the abattoir a couple of weeks ago, but before that they'd all been fine. I've not had any sort of obviously coming down with fluke. But I found this in the Farm and Stable Herbal Handbook that I think is on the pad thing.
Yeah.
I was combing through all of the plants, and it's the herb centauri. So it says it likes well-drained sandy soil in full sun, which is maybe not super Highland friendly, but I do have, as well as a lot of wet ground, I've also got a lot of craggy, rocky areas. So I was thinking of trying to encourage a little bit sort of where the wild thyme is, really, essentially, sort of encourage a little bit in those areas and just see what happens. But I have my ducks and geese are a big part of my fluke management strategy. I don't know if it will work or not, but having the geese and the ducks, so the ducks to eat the snails and the geese to eat the grass. So I have the geese on normally I would have the geese on the wet grass over the winter and the sort of early spring, so they would eat the grass that had all of the little cysts on it, hopefully, and then there wouldn't be as many for the sheep to eat, essentially. So I've got Shetland geese because I read on the Shetland Goose website that they were traditionally used for that purpose. So yeah, that's me and fluke.
That sounds great. I think that we have time for one really short last question, and then I'll be sharing as well all the links to the different websites, and you can find people's handles there, just for you to not worry if there's any questions that we've not addressed. We will be addressing them later on in the Padlet as well. So Caroline, last question.
All right, this is quite an interesting one. People are curious about if there's any activity buildings or communication exercises that you do with your animals, especially, this has come up a couple of times, if the animals are not used to eating that particular herb or whatever it may be, or alternative, how do you encourage those feedings?
Well, for the poultry, it's quite simple. I mean, I make a mash and introduce herbs gradually into that. So they love oats and things and corn. So if you make them a regular, they might get a Sunday brunch treat of every week, a nice mash. And you can just build up what herbs that you put into that, and they will accept it quite happily. Sometimes they just don't, for some reason, I had turkeys this year that, for reasons best known to themselves, didn't like the mash, just didn't want it at all, but would quite happily eat sea buckthorn and things like that. So they were still getting some very nutritious alternatives. So I wasn't too worried about it, and they were lovely and shiny, feathered, and looked okay. So other ways that I do it is, like I mentioned earlier, is the distillery mash that is available in Scotland. It might not be available, obviously, in other parts of the country, unfortunately. But because that, again, is a mash of barley that's been malted, it's easy to put things into that to encourage them to eat, especially if it's warm. They love it when it's come straight from the distillery. But if they're getting that as a regular feed, you can add different things into that at different times of the year as you need to dose.
Great.
With the goats, I only have to persuade one goat to eat it, which is my herd matriarch, because of course once she eats it, the rest of the herd will follow her lead. So if it's anything they're not sure about, once she'll take it, anyone else will follow.
My sheep are pretty inquisitive and will quite like investigating new things. I think enough of them are up for trying things that it's not something I've ever noticed being a problem. If anything, they are always desperate to get into places where there's something new to try, rather than being, worried about it.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think that we're right on time now. Just first of all, thanks, SRUC Stars, Spiridula and Caroline. That was really, really interesting. And Charlotte, Kathy, Catherine, it was absolutely brilliant. I know that we're always talking about this, but this time it feels like I have so much information. As we mentioned, this is being recorded, but also if you want to share resources, which is something that we find is always a problem, we've created a Padlet to continue this conversation. So you can download the chat. That's absolutely fine. It's really easy. So 3 little dots that you find by the chat where it says file, just download it. You can get all the information there. But if for some reason you lose it, you can always go to our Padlet, which is right here. I'm sharing the link, and you can continue a conversation. I've also put in the links to Charlotte and Catherine's websites and SRUC, and also the RELACS project, so you can have more information. Again, if you have any questions, want to continue a conversation, feel free to reach out to any of us. We're kind of Anthelmintic fans anyway, so we can be talking about this for days. And again, I'm not sure if you guys have some final words to say, but I think we're right on time. So if you can keep it short, that'd be great. And thank you from my part. It was really interesting. And thanks, speakers.
Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.